this next session, I'm going to talk about management accounts and how to monitor performance. And this sort of directly ties into budgeting, and you'll see quite a lot of overlap as we go through. So as we said in previous sessions, please feel free to ask questions as we go. And I think any of us are precious about you interrupting our presentations. So either use the Q&A or just feel free to stick up a hand or turn your mic off and just shout a question out. Any option is fine with me. And sorry, I've just been corrected by Alistair. It's not Alistair next, it's Sally. So ignore everything I've said, and they will lead you through once my 20 minutes are over. So in this session, what I'm going to talk about, and I've got quite a few slides. I won't get through all of them. Some of them will just be there as a bit of a memory job for you later. So what I'm going to talk about is the importance of management accounts, the sorts of information that those accounts should provide, and the key things that you need to account for. Again, I'm assuming that most people in this session are not responsible for producing those financial statements, or if you are, I guess there'll still be a few pointers in there for the sorts of things that should be included. But ultimately, this is aimed at helping you to interpret management accounts, ask some sensible questions if you're not getting the information you want, and then some of the key pointers things to look out for, and we end up with some of the sort of the red flags of if you're seeing this in your management accounts, then you really need to be asking questions. So the whole purpose of this 20 minutes is to I guess give you some of the tools to help you provide a more effective financial oversight. So the first thing I'm going to talk about really is just to highlight how important management accounts are. So what Ben was talking about earlier with your statutory accounts and where the trustees report and annual report go, that is very much an external document, and it is very much looking back at the year that's gone, and often those accounts don't get produced until it could be, well, the final deadline with the Charities Commission is not until 10 months after the year end. So by the time somebody sees those financial statements, it could be, often it's just way too late for them to be of any use in managing the business. And Ben highlighted some of the difficulties you get in those financial statements as well. Charity accounting is complicated. Things don't often, well, sometimes don't follow logic, and so you end up with income and expense not quite matching off. So even if you're a qualified accountant, and if you look at a set of charity accounts, sometimes you've got no idea whether it's been a successful year or not financially, simply because of some of the quirks of the accounting. If you're an accountant who understands that charity, you can unpick it, but often trying to understand it, looking at cold, it can be an absolute nightmare. So the financial statements are very much an external document, and they are looking back, often fairly out of date. Whereas management accounts, that is something that is internal. I mean, it doesn't get shared. Sometimes they get shared with banks and some interested users, but for the most part, management accounts are there as a tool for any organisation to help it effectively run its business, run its charity. And I just sort of really want to highlight that from a financial management perspective, management accounts are way more important than statutory accounts. Statutory accounts, they're useful for us auditors and some and grant givers. They'll look at them just to get an understanding of the financial health of a particular charity, and understand what the plans are. And Ben highlighted that some of the key things are things like your reserves policies and your free reserves. Those are important things for the outside world to know. But in terms of running your charity, management accounts are way more important. And the management accounts typically, they will hopefully include all the information you need to understand what is going on, and can help you ask the right sort of questions so if things are going awry. So yeah, really, if you take nothing away from this session, just you need to make sure that your organisation has really good management accounts, and you're getting the information that you need. And if you're not, those are sorts of questions you need to be asking. Often, when we talk to trustees, they and maybe some of the roles that you have, you're not involved in the day-to-day operations of the organisation, and so management accounts is one of the key ways in which you can sort of get yourself up to speed and get an understanding of what is going on. So certainly from a trustee's perspective, it is critical that they've got management information, because that's one of the ways in which they fulfil their legal responsibilities, because they get to know what's going on. But at the same point, those management accounts need to be reliable. And there's a lost count of the number of times that I go and present. I spend a lot of my time presenting to boards of trustees and explaining their statutory accounts, and you can see often the trustees have got no idea where the numbers come from, because they almost bear no relation at all to your management accounts, which is ultimately that's a failing of the management accounts, because your management accounts and your financial statements should reconcile, and if they don't, then you need to make sure your finance team provide that reconciliation for you, because it's the financial statements are really useful for telling you what the financial health was at a point in time, telling you what your free reserves were, but your management accounts are much more forward-looking, but the two should reconcile. So there's a chance the numbers won't be identical, so they need a bit of reconciliation, but without that, if they can't reconcile, it really undermines their usefulness, because then you just trustees and management will question the value of the management accounts if they think, well, actually what we're presenting to the outside world is completely different to what we're saying inside, which numbers are right. So management accounts are your focus, but there needs to be that sort of sense check to your statutory accounts. So the questions just come through, like clarifying that reconciliation. So hopefully this will make it a little clearer. So you have financial statements, which is what you send to the Charities Commission, and so that's the sort of 60-page document with your annual reports in there, and that's what the outside world will see. The management accounts are the internal accounts that your finance team will produce, and so you may well have you might say your profit or surplus in your management accounts is £100,000. In the statutory accounts, it may say it's £150,000, and there may be really good reasons why they're not the same. And it could be there's an audit adjustment, or it could be the way you account for a bit of income changes. But you need to understand why there is that difference. So hopefully that answers that question. So going on to the management reporting itself. So I'm also a trustee of a local charity, and I remember that the first trustee meeting I turned up to, I was given the management reporting packet, and it ran to 57 pages. And I could guarantee that nobody around the table had looked at all 57 pages. It was just, it was such an unwieldy document that it was no use to us whatsoever to help us to manage that organisation. So the first thing is, management accounts should be understandable. And they shouldn't just be understandable to people with a lot of financial knowledge. It should be a straightforward document. Often you get backing papers to those financial accounts, which can give a lot more detail for those who are interested in it. But fundamentally, there should be some key documents to the management accounts, and they should be plain and simple. Ultimately, you need to know what your income is, what your surplus or deficit is going to be. And then and cash flow will be part of that as well. And when you see best practice in management accounts, often you'll end up almost with their cover page, which has got a RAG rating on there. So someone has gone through the exercise of working out the things that you really need your attention really needs to be brought towards. And if something is highlighted in green, then you think, actually, we put a budget together. The actual costs are very much in line with that budget. It's not something we need to worry about. If it's a red or an amber, then these are the areas that we should be talking about at a board meeting or a management meeting or whatever it is. So it should be understandable. You need to be able to rely on it clearly, and that takes you back to the reconciliation that I was talking about. Then it needs to give you the information that you need, and to this there is no right or wrong answer. I mean, charities come in so many different shapes and sizes that it's impossible to dictate what your management accounts should look like, because if you are an education charity or a care charity or a hospice, your accounts will look very different because your income is very different, your expenditure is very different, and therefore the management accounts need to be bespoke to each organisation, providing the information that trustees and the management team want. And so often it's a sort of an iterative process as you have new people join, the management accounts get knocked around a bit to provide the information that somebody feels they need to be able to ask the right questions. And certainly with the example I gave of the charity I'm a trustee of, we ended up with 57 pages because every year you'd have a new trustee who said, well, why don't we produce this, why don't we produce that? And so you ended up with a document that just completely got out of control. And so that's why the management accounts always needs to be reviewed to make sure it is giving you the information that you need so you can access it quickly and effectively. So the level of detail you give clearly has a bearing on that. And again, there's no right or wrong answer, but certainly from my experience, best practice is to have a few pages of summary at the front and then detail behind, should you want to dive into it. But yeah, you do see some where they do a little bit crazy on the level of detail. But yeah, there is no right or wrong answer. One of the other things to think about is how often are those management accounts produced, and how quickly after the month end. So, back in terms of how often they should be produced. So most organisations do produce their management accounts on a monthly basis. And that may be the right answer for many organisations, but for some it's not. So I guess we use a few examples of independent schools, and that's because they're a little bit different to other charities. But it makes as much sense for some independent schools to produce accounts on a termly basis. So that's what lots of them do, because it's easier for them to monitor performance when they're looking at a whole term's worth of income and expenditure. But for lots of organisations, they produce management accounts monthly. You then have the question about how quickly can those management accounts be produced, and if you're in a very large organisation with an enormous finance team, sometimes with some of our corporate clients, you need to see management accounts get turned out sort of 3 days after the month end, and it's such a slick process. But I can't think of a single charity that's able to do that, simply because you don't have the resource, don't have the finance teams to achieve that. But at the same point, there is no point in producing management accounts that are months late. And I've seen plenty of organisations where they're running sort of 4 months behind, and they're still committed to producing their monthly management accounts. But you think, well, maybe you should just skip a few months and catch up, because it's there comes a point where if information, if you have a charity where things were changing, to find that information out 4 months down the line may be too late. I mean, which is one of the reasons why the format of management accounts needs to be often rethought about and streamlined, because ultimately you want that information quickly. You want it to be accurate, but you want it to be quick as well. So it's getting that balance right. And then we have benchmarking on there as something to consider. So certainly, as a charity, one of the really useful things when we look at management accounts is considering how you're doing compared to other charities of a similar size and structure. So, are your staffing numbers sort of consistent, per pound of income with other, if you're in the care sector with a similar hospice, for example, is your staff cost to income ratio consistent? There's lots of measures that different charities will look at to make sure that they are performing in line with best practice. Because it's very easy to point the strap of thinking, well, this is what we did last year, so therefore, if we're saving a bit of money compared to last year, we must be doing quite well. But actually, if you realise that another charity, their costs are half what yours are, then clearly you're looking at it in the wrong way. You should be thinking about what is best practice, not just what have we done well, and so there needs to be a combination of internal and external thought. So so certain sectors, it's easier to get benchmarking information for. Others, it can be a little trickier. But if you've got some good benchmarking information, it can really improve the value of your management reporting. And then, as Ben had said earlier, understanding your reserves is really important for charities. There have been plenty of examples in recent years where charities have ended up being insolvent, whereas the trustees thought they were fine to have loads of money in the bank, but actually they all their money was tied up in restricted funds, so they had commitments. They had to spend that money on certain things, but they ended up with negative free reserves, so they didn't have money for normal day-to-day stuff, but ultimately they were borrowing from their restricted funds to pay for their day-to-day expenditure, and that's not a situation you want to get into. So your management accounts should also, it doesn't need to be done every month, but they should also be considering what your level of reserves are, and whether there is a potential pinch point coming. So when you look at the management accounts, I mean, ultimately they are there for you to assess the financial performance of your organisation, and depending on how they are produced, you can end up with all sorts of different information on there. As I said, there is no sort of right or wrong, but one of the key thing you always look at is what your surplus is or deficit for the year. I mean, those are always critical numbers, and so if that's not on your management accounts, then obviously there's a gap right from the start. So understanding what your surplus is really important. But actually, just looking at your surplus in isolation isn't a huge amount of use. What you need to do is compare what the surplus actually is to what you're budgeting, to what you had in previous years, and also look at the monthly movements. So what we spoke about in the last session was the budget is the embodiment of your plan. If your surplus for a particular month is in line with your budget, there's a good bet that you are on track with your plan, which is entirely what you want to do. At the same point, you'd also look at what you've done in previous years, because maybe if your budget is showing you being a significantly different organisation, then actually the prior years are probably not terribly relevant. But for many organisations, things don't change that much year on year. So understanding how you've done compared to where you were in the previous year is a good yardstick. So it's ultimately you always want to be getting better and better. So prior years can just give you, one, it helps you to understand if there's a sort of seasonality in your income and expenditure. Two, it's just, again, it's that sense check. And then month-to-month movements are useful because that can help you identify trends. So if you were better than budget for the first 3 months of the year, you might think actually things are going great, but then the next 5 months it might be trending below budget, and that trend could highlight some major problems coming over the horizon. So looking at that financial performance, not just looking at it in isolation, but comparing it to prior years and trends is the real key bit to be done. And at the same point, one of the things we often see missing from management accounts is a balance sheet, because management accounts often focus on the income and expenditure, but balance sheets are important. And on the next slide, I'll just briefly touch on reserves. But the balance sheet will show you. The balance sheet tells you what your financial position is at a point in time. So it'll tell you, the key bits on there are what we call net current assets. So the net current assets are the net of your bank balance, debtors, so the amount that people owe you, any stock you've got, which for charities, often they don't have a huge amount of stock, less your current liabilities. And so that's the bills you've got to pay in the next 12 months. So understanding your net current assets will give you a flavour as to your financial health at that point in time. As long as that's a positive figure and it's trending in the right direction, then things will probably be okay. But don't neglect the balance sheet. I mean, it's easy to focus on what your profit or your surplus is, but the balance sheet is also important. And the point I mentioned earlier about reserves. It's pretty common to see management accounts without reserves in there, but it is really, really important that you do understand reserves. And certainly more important for charities where their level of free reserves are a bit tight. Lots of charities are relatively hand to mouth. They receive grants, they spend them, so they always operate with low reserves. But from a legal responsibility, directors and trustees need to know if they have still got some free reserves to spend, and if they don't, or if those reserves are going down, it just gives you that opportunity to take stock and think, actually, we need to make some changes here. So the last thing a charity wants to do is trade whilst insolvent, and understanding what your free reserves are will give you a much better chance of picking those things up. So yeah, I mean, Ben's touched on reserves, so I won't go into this in any particular detail, but every charity needs to have a level of reserves. That there is a reserves policy in place, and it's easy to think that coming out of the reserves policy is almost a bit of admin, but there is always there should be a good reason why you have the level of reserves that you have, and it is one, it's protected against risk. So anything can go wrong. I mean, if you lose a grant, can you still pay the salaries? That's important. It's a buffer to help you manage cash flow, and it's there to cover unexpected falls in income or costs coming over the hill that you haven't seen. So all those things are really important, and so that should be in your management accounts. I'm conscious that Sally is now in the wings waiting up to me. So the next few slides, the ones that I wasn't going to go through, they're really like key performance indicators. So these are things that should be in your management accounts, and if you've got a summary page, they'll really help you. They can help you understand the financial performance in a really accessible and quick way, because it's just just be a metric which will tell you if things are going as expected to be. So you can have financial and non-financial key performance indicators. So at its simplest, a key performance indicator could be what's our income, or what's our income per member of staff. And then there are non-financial KPIs as well. So for charities, obviously lots of the things you do, you can't really measure it. It's the number of people you've helped, for example. That could be a non-financial KPI, and so those sorts of things should all factor into your management accounts. And so what the phrase we have on here is that you have a sort of balanced scorecard. So you've got a mixture of financial and non-financial KPIs. So there's no one answer. The key thing is to make sure that you have management accounts that work for you. And the last slide before I hand over to Sally is some of the things that you should be looking for. And if you see these, it's there's your red flag. So it's variations from budget. I mean, like I've already said, if things aren't going as you'd expect it to be, you need to understand why, and you need to take some steps to bring it back onto track. If you got, this says high balances, but it could be high balances or low balances, but anything that you're not expecting. If you're forecasting deficits, lots of charities forecast deficits, but you can't forecast deficits year after year. So if your forecasts are showing ongoing deficits, what are you doing to bring those back into balance? Significant benchmark variances are always, again, that's a really quick way of asking, of targeting your focus on areas of concern, and then deficits on there as well. So there are a couple of other slides which will be sent out to you. So it just has a bit of further reading. So there's some links in there to some more charity commission documents and a few other things. And then the CC12, which is a charity commission document about managing charities' finances, is a good read, and I recommend that. It's a really accessible document, so it's very much worthwhile having a look at that.